have a little chat, shall we?
Things have gotten kind of murky in this corner of the internet, so I think we should talk about the specifics of having a narcissistic parent. What does it actually look like to have a narcissistic parent? And more importantly, what are those lifelong consequences of having a narcissistic parent? Now, when we talk about a parental narcissist or a narcissistic family, we're talking about something that's a little bit more complex than just narcissistic personality disorder. At its most basic level, a narcissistic parent is a person who creates a family for the affirmation of a delusion, for access to social standing, or to meet some kind of superficial ego-based goals for themselves. When you're in a narcissistic family, you exist as a tool for the narcissist or narcissists at the top of that family hierarchy, which means children are expected to perform a certain way in order to make that parent look good, to give them social standing, to bring in more money to the family. And if you don't meet the expectations of that narcissistic parent, there's a good chance that you're going to be ostracized, punished, excluded, hurt. Now, when we're looking specifically at the narcissistic parent, there are some specific traits that we're looking for to really clue us into that narcissistic family system. The first and kind of most obvious thing that we see when we're looking at a narcissistic parent is significant immaturity, especially emotional immaturity. This could mean blowing up when that narcissistic parent doesn't get their way. It could mean humiliating their children if it makes them feel good. It could mean overreacting, which is usually the case. There's also a significant amount of blame shifting, right? A narcissistic person is generally not able to take accountability. Now, that doesn't mean they won't pretend to take accountability, but true accountability, a parent being able to come to their child and saying, I don't know, or I got it wrong, I'm sorry, that's not something that happens with a narcissistic parent because it's all about serving their ego. Now, within that, of course, there are super self-centered desires, right? Their desires for their children are more aligned to serving their ego than to serving the health, happiness, and stability of those children. For example, my mom had this thing where she tried to force us to become doctors. She wanted to be able to walk into a room and say, my kid's a doctor. So she tried it with my oldest brother. That didn't take. So then she tried it on me, even though that was not going to be a good fit. Forced margins, forced hierarchies is also a very, very common thing that you find with this narcissistic parent. If you don't perform the way that parent expects, whatever that is, whether that's gender or a career or what you do at school or how you are as an athlete, if you don't meet their demands, their delusions, their expectations, you will be pushed into the margins of the family. You could be switched to a black sheep. You could be pushed out, excommunicated, punished in a million different ways. And there's no sense of boundaries with a narcissistic parent. Narcissistic parents consistently cross the line because they see their children as possessions, not people. And we see a lot of enmeshment with these parents. They will go into the thoughts of their kids. They want to control what they think, what they believe, how they act, how they dress, how they speak, everything. There's a pervasive kind of corruption in the narcissistic family, and they have to have control of everything inside and out. Now, for those of you who had a vulnerable or a covert narcissist as a parent, then you will know all about emotional manipulation. It's not always about outright terror with a narcissist. Some narcissistic parents will say things like, you don't love me, I've worked so hard for you, and you don't love me because you're not doing the thing I want you to do, or you hate me and I'm going to get rid of you, and, making you feel shame and humiliation in order to do what they want. Projection and performance, of course, are a part of it too. Narcissistic people are not able to soothe themselves emotionally, so they project their emotions onto others, expecting those people to soothe those difficult emotional states for them. They also project their insecurities onto their children, their hopes, their desires, their wants, their fears, which unfortunately are not self-directed. They're outwardly directed based on other people, which causes an unstable sense of self in them and their children. And of course, the narcissistic parent would be nothing without delusions, right? It's a core part of narcissism. Narcissistic people are not capable of seeing themselves realistically. They think they're the best person in the room, even if there's no credible evidence of that exists anywhere in the world. You can take my mom, for example. She was always better than everyone in the room. Nothing behind her to prove that. Nothing that she did or said that had ever proved that. So what are the long-term costs of this when you are the child of one of these parents? First up is a lacking sense of self. Narcissists have an unstable sense of self, and they give their children an unstable sense of self. When you are raised by a narcissist, it's never safe to authentically show the things you like, the things you desire, the things you're curious in. You have to do and believe as they tell you to believe, so you never really get to figure out who you really are or what you really want to do. And unstable relationships is one of the most common lifelong consequences of being raised by a narcissistic parent. Children of narcissistic parents go out to form codependent relationships. They get themselves into abusive relationships with partners who are narcissistic, manipulative, coercive, just like their parent. There's a million different ways it goes wrong, but essentially when you don't have that stable sense of self and you're not taught healthy communication and relationship values and interactions, you get thrown out into the world to get more toxic mess. It warps your perception too. When you grow up in a narcissistic household, you have no real sense of reality because the only reality you're allowed to see is the narcissist. So when you step out into the real world, you don't really understand people. You don't really understand their motivations. You may not understand your own motivations, and you may not understand how to move through the world because you were taught one very weird, warped way to see it, and that wasn't helpful, functional, or right. Now, this is the one people really don't like to hear, but unfortunately, when we are raised by narcissistic parents, we go out into the world with toxic tendencies of our own. It's sad, but unfortunately, a massive amount of the behaviors we learn, the beliefs we learn, the way we learn to communicate comes from watching and interacting with our parents and families. So if you grow up in a system where you just watch people getting treated badly, you're going to go into the world potentially and treat people badly sometimes. You might explode. You might find it hard to regulate your emotions. That unstable sense of self directs you into weird places. And last but not least, tangible trauma. Tangible trauma is a lifelong consequence of being raised by a narcissistic parent. It is literally traumatizing to be raised by a narcissistic parent. And what I mean by that is it literally damages your brain and changes the way your nervous system operates, the effectiveness with which your nervous system is able to operate. And it doesn't matter if they never hit you. All of those years, those decades of emotional abuse, emotional manipulation, psychological torture, all of that adds up and equals trauma, because children who have super underdeveloped nervous systems that are trying to develop as quickly as they can are super vulnerable to that trauma. What do you think? Does your parent fit the bill? Let me know in the comments and follow for more.